Ghéusete óljoi, and welcome to the first episode of the Eurōpājósjo Studies channel. Today we'll be discussing the pronunciation of Modern-Indo-European, or as it is called in the language itself, Eurōpājósjo. We'll be doing that with this scheme. So we'll be starting with the pronunciation of the individual vowels, then we'll be moving on to the diphthongs. In between, we'll probably discuss some minute other factors as well, after which we'll move on to the pitch accent. We'll be pronouncing individual consonants, as well as look at the gemination of consonants and some other assimilation factors that come into play as well. And finally, we'll be practicing this knowledge on individual words and at the end, some sentences as well. First, we'll be discussing the individual vowels, which I have here grouped into two categories. The pure vowels, which are so named because they're not influenced by other qualities. And we also have the impure vowels, which then logically, by extension, are influenced by such vowels qualities. But we'll see those later. The first vowel that we have here is A, which in many textbooks is given as the A vowel in father in British English, but this is actually not correct, because as you can hear, the A does not sound like the A. If you know Spanish or some other European language, it's probably quite similar to the A sound in that language. So it's not A or E or A, it's A. Then we have the E vowel, which does not really exist in English, but it is found in some diphthongs. For example, in the word sé, or as most English speakers would pronounce it, say. It is the combination of the vowels E and E. So if I say really slowly, it will be sei. But if I then remove that I sound at the end, it will become se, and that E vowel is the one that you want to go for. Then we have the vowel E, which fortunately for us does correspond to an English vowel, namely the English vowel in words like beetroot, meat, beat, feet, etc. So fortunately for us, there is a silver lining to the modern Indo-European vowels. Then we have the vowel O, which, like E, does not directly exist in English, but it is found in some English diphthongs. For example, in the word no, which means no, of course, and it is pronounceable without a W sound at the end, so it consists of an O and an U sound. So if I say no really slowly, you can kind of hear the transition. If I then remove that U sound at the end, it will become the pure no, which is how some dialects say it, and that O vowel is the one that you want to go for. And finally, we have the U sound, which in English doesn't really exist per se, but a quite close sound is found in words like foot. So you can hear the difference between U and U. The second one, the U, is the one that you want to go for, which is quite similar to the Spanish vowel in words like me gusta. So those are the 5 unique pure vowels of modern Indo-European. But before we move on to the diphthongs and the pitch accent, as I said in the beginning, it is important to discuss some other factors that come into play. Here we have vowel length, and modern Indo-European vowels can be short, long, or overlong. And what does this mean in practice? It means that a long vowel is pronounced twice as long as a short one, and an overlong vowel is pronounced thrice as long as a short one. And this can be a distinguishing feature. So here we have 3 words. The first one is potis, which means master, and the second one is potis, which means drink. And you can hear that the vowel O in potis is twice as long as the vowel E in the word. And here you can see that the words are distinguished solely by the length of their vowel O, which shows that if you mispronounce a vowel length, then the word can take on a different meaning. I've listed two other such pairs here. The first would be prios, which means there, and prios, which means prior. Then we have ka, which means certainly, and ka, which means this one. Finally, we have overlong vowels, which, as I said, correspond to three short vowels. For example, the word female cook would be ghwãs in Modern-Indo-European. And if we make the vowel overlong, it becomes instrumental with the female cook, which would be pronounced pokwa. So you can hear that that overlong vowel really is quite overlong, so to say. Then we'll be moving on to the pronunciation of the diphthongs. And fortunately, as I said at the beginning, English has quite a lot of diphthongs. We've already seen two of them, and they work exactly the same as in Modern Indo-European. So what really happens is that two vowels come together and they form a single combination or unison of vowels. So, as I said in English, say the vowels E and E combine into one, which sounds like A. And this process also exists in Modern Indo-European, for example, in the word dogway, which means in the day, and it has that E and that E at the end merge into the same diphthong, the exact same one as in English. So this is pronounced dogway, dogway. That's basically it for the diphthongs. Then we have a very difficult aspect of pronunciation, which is pitch accent. And unfortunately for us, unlike English, which has, for example, stress in the words permit and permit, so you can hear the emphasis kind of shifts between when it's a verb and a noun. Modern Indo-European doesn't do that. Instead, it has a pitch accent. And we're unfortunately not quite sure on how that was pronounced. We believe it was probably a rise in pitch equivalent to a musical fifth. And the reason that we believe this is because daughter languages, the remaining daughter languages that do have this feature, point to that being the case. However, because only one syllable is accented, a little bit of stress probably was incorporated as well, which we know, for example, from Koine Greek evidence. So it is not a problem if you pronounce the accented syllable with some extra emphasis. However, the main distinguishing feature was not stress, but rather pitch. How would that have probably sounded? As I said, we're not sure, but what we do in reconstructions is usually something like this. So I've here listed two words. He, she, it drinks is the first one, and the dative form to me or for me is the second. So the first one probably would have sounded something like pibeti, pibeti. So you can hear that the pitch starts high, pi, and then it drops, beti, pibeti. And then for the second word, we have a diphthong at the end, and so it's pronounced méghei, méghei, méghei. So that's basically what pitch would sound like. As I said, we're not exactly sure, but this is what most modern Indo-European speakers do in their practice, in their pronunciation. Now we can finally wrap up the vowel section by looking at the impure vowels, of which there are 4 if you want to be precise, and 8 which I've included here. The first one, the upside down E, is a schwa, which we do have in English, fortunately. For example, in the word believe, that first E in b, is a schwa. It's a very common English vowel sound, and so it shouldn't be an issue. Then the next ones, which have a macron, so the stripe below which the diaresis is written, so a double dot basically. These are called laryngeal vowels because they arose from laryngeal consonants being found in zero-grade upload roots. You'll be discussing those in a future lesson. But these basically are the regular vowels. They are long, but they have an E-like quality to them, which is not noticeable for the first one, which is ah, like in the word praos, which means first. So that one is just like a regular pure A. However, the other two are e and ö, and there you can see that the A and the O vowel have kind of shifted to an A-like sound, which is even indicated in the IPA signs, as you can see here. So the second one would be pronounced like the vowel A in cat. So it's ka, eh. That's the sound that you want to go for. An example in Modern-Indo-European would be, let me think of one. It would be, for example, gnétos, which means born. And for the third one, it's like the French vowel e, which doesn't exist in English. So this one you really have to practice, and it's again long. An example would be gnétos, which means known. And then we have 4 syllabic consonants, which, as I now say, are consonants and not vowels. But they act like vowels grammatically, and hence I've included them here. They basically just sound like the regular consonantal counterparts. So M, or more accurately, L, N, and R. And we'll come back to those later. And that was it for the vowels. We'll now be moving on to the consonants, most of which luckily do exist in English without much change. So I'll just go through this list now. The first one is B, which exists exactly in English too. For example, in the word birthday. And whenever an H in writing comes after a consonant, that means that the consonant is aspirated, so it is followed by a puff of air. For example, B and H together is pronounced b. So we have the unaspirated b, like in English, and aspirated b. So if I pronounce those in succession, it will be b, 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 b. Then we have the C-looking letter, which isn't pronounced like a C at all. It is actually pronounced like a G with rounded lips. So if you want to pronounce it, you can first say the W sound, then hold that sound, but not pronounce it. And then you can say G instead. So we have W, W, W. And it can also be aspirated, which would sound like W. So we have W and W, 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 W. Then we have a regular D sound, like in English death, and that too can be aspirated, which will be the difference between D and D, 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 D. Then you have a regular G sound, like in English great, which again can be aspirated, which will be pronounced like G. So we have G, 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 G. And you should make sure that you aren't pronouncing these as 2 different sounds, so it shouldn't sound like G, which is just a G and an H pronounced after one another. It should be one sound, so not G, but G. Then we have the consonant H, which actually doesn't exist in Modern-Indo-European. I've only included it here because it can occur in foreign names like Dutch Johannes. And it will be pronounced exactly like in English hey, so like a regular H sound. Then we have the consonant J, which is pronounced like y. So it is pronounced like the English consonant Y in words like yesterday. So it's written differently, but we do have that sound in English. Then we have the consonant k, which is pronounced like in English. However, in English, in case you didn't know, consonants like p, t, and k at the beginning of words are aspirated. So that's why there is a difference between the k and ho, with the puff of air, and at the end of words like in back. And for p, t, and k, in Modern-Indo-European, you want to pronounce them without aspiration, so like the k in back. The L is pronounced like the regular L in English, but not the dark L like in fool, but rather the light L like in the word light or kool. The consonants M and N are pronounced like in English, for example in Mr. and Nelle. The P is pronounced as in English as well, again without aspiration. The Q sound is again different. It formally corresponds to a voiceless variant of the C sound, which means it's a K sound with rounded lips. So again, you can say w, hold the w sound, and then say k. So we have w, 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 w. And again, it shouldn't be two sounds, so it shouldn't be kawa, kawa. It should be one sound, which is a K with rounded lips. So it's kwa, not kawa, kwa. Now we arrive at perhaps the most difficult sound for English speakers, which is the R, which is not like the English R, but it's like Spanish R. For example, in the word estar. This one takes a lot of practice, I've heard. I would suggest you look up some YouTube videos to see how it is pronounced exactly and just stick at practicing it until one day you just suddenly master it, which is a journey that every language learner has to go through at least once in his lifetime. Then we have the English sound s, which in modern Indo-European may have existed. It may also have been pronounced with retraction, like in Greek, which means it was sort of a merger between s and sh, which would have sounded like s. So not s as in English or sh as in English, but s, which is how I tend to pronounce it myself. Then we have the T, which is again pronounced like in English, but only at the end of words. So it's not t as in top, it's t as in cat. However, it probably was pronounced without that fricative almost sound at the end, as in English and Dutch. It probably was pronounced more like the dental variant in Spanish, so like the. So not t, but the. And finally, we have the consonant W, which was pronounced exactly like in English. For example, in the word Western. So it's a W. That was it for the consonants themselves. There are two features that need to be discussed in regards to consonants. And the most important one is that if two consonants, identical consonants actually come after one another, then they are held together, unlike in English. And for some consonants, that's possible. For example, you can say an S as long as you want. For example, so in a word like you are, which in modern Indo-European would be SC, with a held S sound, that's no problem. However, you can say a T and hold it. So if you try that, you just do not say anything. So you can only say it once. So if we have two T's or similar consonants after one another, rather than holding it for long, which is impossible physically, we instead hold the air and then push it out. So you don't say atas for dad, but we say atas, atas, which takes a bit of practice. It also exists in Italian if you want to hear a native speaker use that feature. There is actually one exception to this rule, which is the cluster SS. if two S's come after one another, it can be pronounced long, as in SC, or it can be just pronounced like one S, as in SC. And finally, we have some sandy changes, which dictate that if aspiration comes before an unaspirated sound, then it is lost. For example, we have here laptun, which means to take, and it's pronounced actually like laptun, so without aspiration. And then we have the fact that voicing is lost before voiceless sounds, so it's not labtun, but it's laptun. And this applies in reverse as well. However, these are changes made to facilitate pronunciation, and we do those subconsciously in English as well. So I wouldn't worry about these changes. Just know that they exist. So you don't try to force yourself to say something like labhum, which even now when I said it, the assimilation happened automatically. So don't worry about these changes. They will come naturally. Now that we have discussed the pronunciation in detail, I decided to jot down some words from, I think it's lesson 5 from the guidebook from February of, I believe it was 2020. So I suggest we now pronounce these words before moving on to 4 sentences. The first word is ad, which means close to or near to. The second one has a aspirated G sound and it's pronounced ageron, ageron. The third one is B and it's pronounced with the ghwãs sound, so the rounded K sound, the K sound with rounded lips, and it will be pronounced something like bhekula, bhekula. The fourth one is the word for mead, which is an alcoholic drink that was commonly drunk during the Proto-Indo-European period and even after. It still is actually drunk sometimes in, for example, Germanic cultures, and it's pronounced like midhu, midhu. But actually, the second vowel is actually short, so it's if you do not exaggerate it, it will probably sound like midhu, midhu. The fifth one has a schwa, which is also why the accent has moved to the final syllable, and this one will be pronounced gris, gris, gris. And the final one has a syllabic consonant, which means that the pitch accent is on the A vowel, and it would be pronounced, it also has an overlong vowel, and it would be pronounced smstas, smstas. So now that we have looked at the words, we can practice everything together by reading out some sentences. I've jotted down 4 from the same lesson in the guidebook, and I will now read them out loud. The first one is, I will first read out the words individually. So we have quota, which means how, plūēti, which means is called, sunus, which means son, and tewe, which means your. So literally it says, how is called son yours? And this is read as quota plūēti sunus tewe. The second sentence has quodhe, which means where, rebheti, which means lives, sunus again, which means son, and tewe, which means your. So together this would sound like quodhe trebheti sunus tewe, which is where does your son live? Then we have the third sentence with lokum, which means grove clearing, ad, which means close to or near to, trebhonti, which means they live, and bekulas, which means bees in the plural. So taking this together, it will be lokoma trebhonti bekulas, which means close to the grove, clearing, bees live. And finally, we have the sentence or the words sunus, which means son, merit, which means honey, esti, which here means to eat, or rather he, she, it eats, yoque, which means and, medhu, which means mead, and pibeti, which means he/she/it drinks. And taking that together, we have sunus melitesti yoque medhu pibeti, which means the son eats honey and drinks mead. That was it in terms of the lesson for today. If you study this lesson with attention a few times and keep practicing, that means you should have a pretty decent pronunciation at the end of everything, which I would make sure is actually the case, because it is imperative that you start your studies with a good pronunciation. And I wouldn't sweat everything. Even my own pronunciation is probably not perfect. For example, the pitch accent, as I said, is quite uncertain and difficult for native speakers of a stress accent language, especially since the system that we have here is quite rare. For example, Japanese has a pitch accent, but it is a very different system from this one. And most other languages, as I said, have lost it, instead opting for a stress accent system like in English. So we can probably never get 100% accuracy, but you should work on distinguishing vowel length. So instead of saying sunus, you should say sunus, which has that long oo sound, and just focus on things like those. And then when you feel secure in your pronunciation, you can move on to the first lesson of the guidebook. I wish you the best of luck, and thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments, and best of luck.